Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. I am your host, Apostle Aladdin. And on today's episode, I am joined by a special guest, Shalise from Cults to Consciousness. We were just live on her channel earlier talking about Islam and Mormonism. If you haven't checked out her channel and the video that we published together on her channel, please do check it out. Here's her channel. Link is going to be in the description or in the
Oh,
title
you're so
of the
good.
video.
I didn't do
You
that. Now
reminded
I
me to
feel
do that.
bad.
That's okay.
And I just realized this whole time I've been saying your name wrong. It's Aladdin.
Aladdin, Aladdin. Like in Arabic, I say
Okay.
Ala-ed-Din. So whatever's closest. So yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Well, that sounds so much cooler than how I was saying it. Thanks for letting me come on your channel. I'm
of
honored to
course.
be here.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And
Yeah.
if anyone's unfamiliar, if you're watching this after the live stream, we've streamed together already for about 40 minutes. Talking about Islam and Mormonism, so it's just going to be a continuation of that. So if you haven't watched it, go watch it first.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So
how
we
about you
have a
tell the
lot to cover.
people? Yeah, we're gonna try to cover everything, but we're probably not gonna get through everything. Um,
Yeah.
and that's just the similarities, let alone the differences.
Oh my gosh.
So one thing I want to ask you first before we begin, for people who are unfamiliar with your channel, can you briefly describe what it is that you do and who you are?
Yeah. We're basically an advocacy channel. So we are anti abuse, anti coercion, anti manipulation and control. And so we talk about all the ways that these high control groups or cults are controlling people through survivor stories. So we bring on people who have left these different religions or groups. And we've even been talking about cults of one. So narcissistic family members, fathers who were like cult leaders, and they tell their stories. And through that, we're able to draw parallels, find connections. People find solace knowing that they're not alone. People find little tidbits of information that are helpful in the healing process. And we really get to see the full 180 of these people from how they've been alone and isolated and controlled into their freedom, their peace, their consciousness side of the story.
Thank you for that summary. I
Yeah.
highly recommend that you check out her channel. Her and Jonathan are doing an excellent job with their interviews, and
Thank
I
you.
yeah, I really want people to go and subscribe to that channel immediately. That's an order. Um,
Thank you. Yeah, so I hope people were able to migrate over with the redirect. Oh, Oscar wants to say hi. Are wieners allowed in your chat?
we're talking about dogs, yes.
um yeah, so I'm not able to see the comments, but I hope people were able to come over. Oh yeah, the people are
Yeah,
here.
yeah, a lot of
Yay, new
people are here.
favorite collaborators. So I guess I can quickly just say what we've covered on my channel, and then we can pick it up so people know what they kind of missed. um but like you said, we're probably not going to get through it. We have this enormous list and we're like at the top still. So, general statements: one true religion, based in the Abrahamic teachings. They both don't agree with the Trinity. We've been comparing and contrasting the prophets, so Joseph Smith and Mormonism, and we were talking about polygamy. What else do we talk about? The rewards and punishments in heaven or the afterlife. We talked about the hierarchical system of power. Um, what else? Oh, we were just talking about how they had angels visit them, and then they would have revelations that were super convenient to help them out.
Yes, and I was talking about the similarities in some of what you mentioned to Muhammad, and I covered the time that he got caught sleeping with his slave and how
Mhm.
he explained that away, or basically said, God said it's within my rights. There's a couple of other similarities, like one time he fancied his adopted son's wife. So here's the twisted way in which that was resolved. Um, a basically a verse was revealed that said that you cannot adopt someone. So he outlawed adoption essentially just so he could marry this one person. And also, like it was said that there is no shame in this, in marrying your
A
ex adopted
daughter-in-law?
son. Well, yeah, after she divorced her. As the narrative goes, that his adopted or ex-adopted son said, "You know what? Yeah, I don't want her." But obviously, there was some degree of coercion, or even if Muhammad didn't explicitly
Mm.
ask for it, when the guy who you think is God's gift on earth, wants something, I can see how that would happen. But yeah, because of that verse, adoption is not legal in the Muslim world. I mean,
Whoa.
you can take care of a child, you can still do charity for children, but they will never be legally your son or daughter. And there's some talk about how this had to do with lineage, and that was a big deal back then, and all that kind of stuff. But this was when God put his foot down and said no adoption. So, how
That's
convenient.
so interesting. The only thing that's similar to that is we kind of went over the sealings in heaven and how families need to be sealed together in Mormonism to be together in heaven. So that would be the situation where Mormons claim that if you're not sealed to your children, then you're not going to be with them in the afterlife. So it's not a current thing, but
Mhm.
a later thing.
Yeah, and about that point, so there's so many similarities. In Islam, it's not necessarily said as explicitly as you mentioned it, but it is understood that um, if your family members are not Muslim, you don't get to beg for them to go to heaven. They're going to go to hell, and you can't do anything about that. So
Oh, okay.
obviously that is a coercion tactic, and there's even explicitly a ruling on how you can't make prayer for a non-Muslim after they die. Before they die, you can make prayer that God helps them and turns them to Islam and so on. But after they die, you can't
Hope
do
is
that.
lost.
Yeah. So
Interesting. Well,
mm,
here's a twist, plot twist. One of the differences is that and I say we, I'm not Mormon anymore, guys, if it wasn't clear. Um, Mormons believe, or LDS believe, that you can baptize someone when they're dead. So I, as a child, an 8-year-old, well, I think I started doing it at 12. That's a lie. I got baptized at 8. When you're around 12, you can go to the temple and do baptisms for the dead. Now, we're not taking their corpses and dunking them. Super gross. But you're basically the proxy. So I would go get in my little white jumpsuit and get in this huge baptismal font, and there'd be a guy there, and he would do the whole prayer and everything. And I would get baptized over and over and over again, and they would just insert name here. And apparently, if if they get baptized in heaven, they have the option to accept or deny it. But to me, it's still really problematic baptizing people who are not consenting to be baptized. So I always joke, when I die, my Mormon family better not try to rebaptize me, or I'll be really upset and haunt them forever.
it's really funny to me that they still need a body as a placeholder for the baptism. You can't just,
Yeah.
use your finger or like do it in your head or whatever. There has to be a body there.
Yeah. Yeah, they have a
Um,
lot of work to do.
yeah.
They were caught baptizing Holocaust victims. So, really awful stuff.
Yeah, I heard about that one in my brief research on Mormonism. Um, by the way, I wanna highlight this question and answer it on the stream. So it's in Arabic. The question is, I have a question. Where do you get these stories from? And to clarify what I mean by these words, I get them from the Quran, which is the holy book in Islam. It is the holy book that is the revelation, that is the word of God, that is unchanged, literal, perfection, all that stuff. But it's very difficult most of the time to understand what the Quran is going on about. Like, even it's not just about the language being pretty old, but sometimes there's no context. Like, there's, verses would begin and end, and stories would just pick up, and then a story would be in a completely different part of the Quran as a continuation.
Mm,
So there's this thing called the exegesis, the tafsir in Arabic, as it's called. It's the people's attempt to understand the Quran or to explain it. And there are several scholars throughout the years that are known as, I suppose, the trustworthy ones, but people differ on which one they should take. But these stories are from these exegesis, which heavily rely on something called the hadith, which are stories about the prophet that were written down at least a couple hundred years after his death and transmitted. And that's how we know a lot of context about the prophet's life and about the meaning of the verses. So I just wanted to explain that for someone who doesn't know.
yeah.
um, yeah. And yeah, for people who don't know, because I grew up, my native language is Arabic. That's still my first language, so I can read Arabic and the Quran. um, so yeah, we were talking about similarities
Yes.
between Muhammad and Joseph Smith and Islam and Mormonism. And you mentioned something about Joseph Smith marrying already married women.
Yes.
So Muhammad, I don't know if it was Muhammad specifically or the people in his party, but it was something that was done with his consent, approval, and everything. Basically, when they would raid a town or go to war with another tribe, and they take their women and kids and maybe some men as slaves, they start to divvy them up among themselves. And it happened in one story that people asked, "These women are married, either their husbands just died or they're alive and they're also taken as slaves. Can we, you know, can we do it with them? Can we sleep with them?" And Muhammad said yes. So it's not exactly what you're describing, but it's similar.
Mhm. Yeah, and something similar with what you were just saying, raiding other places and taking them. So that kind of did happen in the this is a disclaimer. We should have said this too because we said it on my channel to start that a lot of things we're talking about are the origins of Mormonism and also some of the more fundamentalist sects, the ones that do still practice polygamy and such. And I'll try to make the distinction wherever needed and possible. But in the origins of Mormonism, when they did settle Utah, they were known to go to some Indian tribes, take women as their wives or slaves. It's lesser known. They say that they worked with the Indians, which in some cases they did, but that did happen. And also, I think it's fair to say that there was a lot of human trafficking going on because they would send missionaries out to places like Europe, which is why I have Scandinavian roots. I mean, most people in Utah look the same. They're like blonde hair, blue eyes. I miss that gene, sadly. I didn't take after my mom, but they would take these women from these places, usually places that were more poor, and they're like, "Hey, we're going to take you to the United States and it's going to be great and bountiful and this and that." And then when they got there, they're like, "And you're assigned as a plural wife." And they're like, "Wait a second." So it was basically human trafficking, and that's one way that they were able to multiply so quickly because they were just taking a bunch of wives and all having a ton of children, and they populated the state that we know as Utah, and that's how they really survived. And I think we're going to talk about how something similar with you and Islam, how they were really able to thrive because of the migration and because they were taking over different places.
Yeah, so if I remember the story correctly, Muhammad started preaching in Mecca, which was already if the stories are to believed, a central hub of religions and trade. So the holy mosque that is today the holy mosque, it used to still be a holy site back then, and people would walk around the Kaaba, that big black building or that cubic building. Uh, but at the time, I mean, the story goes in Islam that it was one of the prophets before. I think it was Abraham who built it, and then that's the same one. But if I remember correctly, there were many of these sites across that region, so it's not even clear if it is actually the same one or if there was one. But basically, Muhammad started preaching Islam there, and people didn't care for it, and eventually he started annoying them, and people started um, disliking him for his preaching. And whether you believe that he was bullied out of Mecca or persecuted out, or maybe he felt like he couldn't get a following there. I believe he had a following of less than a couple dozen or some small number. And he went to Medina, and that's when he started to gain a bigger following. And then it turned into more conquest and raid. And that's how he got a much bigger following, and then went back to Mecca and took it over, and then destroyed all the idols and all the symbols of worship that existed there, and claimed that basically he took it back for Allah, that it belonged to God, to Allah, and it was a corruption to allow the polytheists to worship there. So that's
Mm,
kind of how it started. And in that process, some Muslims believe that every single war that he fought was a defensive war somehow, that he just kept getting into wars for some reason, just defending himself all the time. But there were a lot of wars that were very obviously offensive. And in those wars, he would take slaves. And he doesn't even need their consent to sleep with those slaves if they're women, or to sell them, or it was terrible. He legalized slavery, basically. It was already practiced, but God gave it the okay because of Muhammad.
That's interesting. It's something similar, but not to that extreme, where Joseph Smith claimed persecution. And as a Mormon growing up, I was told he was so persecuted because it's the one true religion. And obviously, Satan is trying to destroy it. And people were always after Joseph Smith. And they would show us these films of him getting tarred and feathered. And you're like, oh my gosh, that's so awful. And then come to find out later, once I left the church, the reason he was tarred and feathered and almost castrated was because he was trying to marry people's kids, and they were like, no, you can't do that, polygamy is illegal. And so you had these mobs chasing him, and as we mentioned in my previous episode that we just came from, that he was a treasure digger and no one ever found anything, and so he was just conning people out of money. And so of course you're going to have people who are really upset, so he was always running from the law, moving from place to place to place. And then he eventually died in jail because there was a printing press that was printing, hey, you should watch out for Joseph Smith. He's marrying a bunch of kids around here. And he got upset and he burned it to the ground. So that is how he died. I'm not sure about your side of the story.
So he burned the printing press, and then people came for him and killed him.
He burned the printing press and then he was put in jail for treason and something else, which is slipping my mind. Because also, it's important to note that he was the mayor of Nauvoo. He ran for president in 1844 and obviously failed. And he had his own militia, which was the largest militia in the United States at the time. So he's making waves and he's doing big things and he had a lot of followers. So when he was put in jail for this and then a mob came and killed him in the prison, it was just like, oh, see, obviously he is a true prophet and he died for his faith. But, he died because he did a lot of stupid things and people were coming for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with Muhammad, eventually, as the story goes, I'm actually working on a video about this specific topic on how he died. At some point, one of the tribes that he took over, to put it kindly, there was a woman who he commanded to cook food for them, and she put poison in the food. And some of his companions were hurt and died from that poison. He was just badly injured, and then years later, he was complaining about the pain that he attributes to that poisoning, and eventually he died from complications caused by that. So it's not exactly the same. Like, it's not that a mob came after him, but it was the consequences. And actually, yeah, when he asked her, why did you poison me? She said a couple of things. She said, I wanted to know if you were a true prophet, because a true prophet would know if he was being poisoned. And also, it's funny because he has a saying about how if you eat 7 dates in the morning every day, you're immune to poison or something. So maybe he forgot to eat dates that day.
Whoops.
But also, she said, like, for what you did to my people, her own family members were dead because of him. So
Mm,
I guess a consequence of his actions that's similar to Joseph Smith.
yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So there was one more thing before we talk about the success through migration, which I think we are kind of getting to, but they both made outlandish cosmological and astrological and geological claims. Do you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, I can remember a few off the top of my head. There's this idea that there are 7 skies or 7 heavens, and that we can only see like the lowest one or something. There and at some point there were apologists who were saying, look at how many layers of ozone and so on are around the Earth, and it's equal to 7, and that's all BS. There's none of that. There were claims about how the mountains are pegs that keep the Earth from having too many earthquakes or from falling apart or something. So that's not correct. And I think it had a very geocentric view of the Earth. Like, he seemed to think that the sun would set in a specific pool of mud, and that the sun would go next to God at some point. And basically, he seemed to understand that he didn't understand time zones at all, and he thought that during Ramadan, during some days, God would be at the lowest sky listening to us only during the last third of the night. But if he understood time zones, he would know that God would be on 24-hour duty, because it's always the last third of the
Hmm.
night somewhere on Earth. So
Yeah.
yeah, these are just a few of them.
Okay. So get ready for this.
Hmm.
Joseph Smith wrote about the moon and the inhabitants on the moon and how they were 10 feet tall and dressed like Quakers.
Okay.
He he claimed that God lived on a star called Kolob next to the sun. And there's a song in Mormonism. It's like, if you could hide to Kolob in a twinkling of an eye. So I remember singing that as a kid. So it's not just something that we're like, oh, Joe, he's just like making up stuff. It's deep in the doctrine, which nobody really talks about, but it's there. I mean, the biggest one, which is the inhabitants of the states before anyone settled it, that's the whole point of the Book of Mormon, is that he claims Israelites came down and settled and settled America, and it's the Nephites and the Lamanites, and there were wars, and basically God cursed them with dark skin, and that's where we get Native Americans from, super racist and problematic. And so he claims that there were all of these people before anyone else got here. And the funny thing is, there's zero evidence of that. So recently, because of findings with DNA, because zero archaeological evidence, the Mormon Church has started to say, well, the Book of Mormon is more of a spiritual document than a historical document, even though the entire founding of the church is based on the Book of Mormon being absolutely 100% correct. And there's so many issues with it and mistakes, and we could go on forever, but I just find that that's really interesting that he had this whole plan. And we know now mostly it's because he thought, and there was this whole rumor back in his day, that the Native American people were definitely not smart enough to create these mounds that they were finding. It was the mound builder myth. So they had to create this scenario, or he created the scenario to this problem where they used to be white people, but then they were cursed with dark skin. And that's why that's how they were able to make the mounds, because they were actually white people.
Wow. Okay. There's so many
There's
layers to
a
that.
lot of issues there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I have a random question that's not about the topic we're just talking about, but
Okay.
um, we were talking earlier about you mentioned something about how Mormonism began, and it was Joseph Smith finding these golden
The golden
tablets,
plates. Yeah.
plates, yeah. And something that I found out in my quick research was that they were written in an ancient Egyptian language, allegedly, and he was able to translate that. Um, my question to you is, did anyone see those tablets or the ancient Egyptian language?
That's a good question. It's a complicated answer. So no one actually saw the plates. But if you look at a Book of Mormon and you look at the beginning, it's like witnesses and they all have their signature or whatever. I think there's 8 witnesses of the Book of Mormon. And so that's where the church says, no, these people saw the plates. But if you read their accounts, they saw them with their spiritual eyes. So they didn't actually see them. They just saw something with a cloth over it. And then in their spiritual brain were like, oh, I can see them. So no one ever really physically saw them. Even when he went to retrieve them, he made Emma, his wife, turn around as he unburied them, which we think he just made something that looked like it would be, I don't know, something heavy made of gold, hid it somewhere under a rock, and then retrieved it and didn't let anyone see it, but they all saw it kind of laying there on the table. So no one else was allowed to look at it. But I think what you're talking about, the Reformed Egyptian, he called it Reformed Egyptian, by the way, which doesn't exist. Were the it was this transcript. This is such a weird story. How do we okay, I'm just gonna tell it. Whatever. We're gonna run out of time. So he bought a mummy from a traveling show, like a mummy show, an actual mummy from Egypt. He bought one. And in it, there was a script that was a really basic funerary text that like you can find it in any sarcophagus. And he found it and he was like, wow, it's a good thing that I can translate this by the power of God. I'm such a prophet. So he translates it into what we now know as the Book of Abraham. And he even he even redrew some of the pictures on it, and it is laughable honestly, if you saw this, you would be like, wow, this guy
Wait,
had
it's
no
still
idea.
it still
We
survived?
have it. We have
Okay,
it.
that's awesome.
So that's the one thing that we do have in our possession. And so when we retranslate it, because we're like, whoa, we can read Egyptian now, let's prove that he was a true prophet. Completely different, not even close to being the same thing. So, right, that was one of the things when I found it, I was like, oh, he made it all up. And then I left Mormonism. So, so yes, that was Joseph Smith.
That's one thing that boggles my mind about more recent, like newer, younger religions is that they didn't have
Provably false.
technology back then. But yeah, I mean, it's so close to us that it wasn't a long time for the lore to be built up and for myths to form and everything. It's just, a couple of generations ago,
Yeah.
basically. Um, so
Yeah,
it's
I'm
it's yeah.
related to someone who was the first Mormon baptized in England, the first woman baptized in England. Like, she's my, I think, third great grandma or something. Like, it's not that
Wow.
long ago this started.
Um, I want to quickly highlight a couple of comments. So, late night Keiju, thank you so much for the super chat. They say very interesting comparison of these two loony opportunistic prophets. I refrain from saying loony prophet because I just want to talk about what they did and what was wrong about it. Because I feel like it scares people when you put a label on it, but I'm not contesting whether or not they're loony. Um,
I mean, I'll
yeah.
call Joseph Smith loony, 100%. I back that up.
Yeah. And I like to I think that people get angry enough when I just point out what Muhammad did without even calling him a loony. So I don't
Sure.
need to call him a loony. I just want to criticize what he did and see what could be done better. But yeah, but Joseph Smith is a loony. I'm not worried to say it. um, And so this, I guess you get this sentiment a lot too, right? This Barry's saying, "Can you just leave Islam and have some peace?" And then there's a bunch of other comments about how, like, why are you guys so obsessed with Islam? Do you hear that a lot about Mormonism as well?
The Mormon thing is you can leave it, but you can't leave it alone. And that's something that I'm pretty sure the religion has taught them to just parrot. And so it's funny because I tell people, you realize that's a thought stopping cliche. They tell you that on purpose so that you don't say, oh, I wonder what they're saying. I wonder if any of it's true, or maybe I should look into it. You just say, oh, they just can't leave it alone. And so it's anti Mormon propaganda without actually giving it critical thought.
Yeah. That it's the same exact thing we hear, you left Islam, but it lives rent free in your head, or,
Right.
you're so obsessed. It's your only personality trait, things like that. But as you mentioned, I can't remember if it was in this stream or the other one, that, when someone's a Mormon, it's their entire personality. And
Yeah.
for a lot of Muslims, it is. And some Muslims are maybe a little bit more casual, so they can't understand that someone might have invested a lot of their life and their beliefs into it. So
Yeah.
when they leave, it's obviously a big deal, and it's something that they need to figure out. Well, what's life now? And am I crazy or are they? These kinds of thoughts. So and
Mhm.
and also there's a lot of harm that is still happening because of their religion. So there's many reasons that I and you can give, but as you said, it's just a thought stopping cliche.
Yeah, well, something about this too, and I think we should bring it up because it's also relevant to this, which is it's totally fine for, according to them, for people to go out and knock on your door and try and convert you to the religion. And it's totally fine to give out Book of Mormons and give out these little cards. I was given cards that were the I Am a Mormon campaign, which, by the way, they refute the name Mormon anymore. They say it's a victory for Satan. That's like a recent thing that the prophet came out with, but it's because people were Googling Mormon and there's a lot of information out there. And so they're like, well, don't call us Mormons. So LDS, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saint member, short LDS. So we were given these cards to literally hand out to people and try and convert them. And it's interesting because that's totally fine in their head. But when I just have a channel, for example, that's like, hey, here's some of the things that we should address that are creating trauma for people, they're like, you just can't leave it alone. Why are you shoving it down our throats? I'm like, I'm not going to your house and being like, knock, 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 you should not be Mormon because X, Y, or Z. Like, I'm leaving you alone. You're the one coming to my channel to
Mhm.
hear what I have to say. And so It's
Yeah, and this is not like
contradictory.
broadcasted on TV or anything. This is
No.
not it's not like you turn on your TV and suddenly we're there or shoving it down your throat on channel 1.
Yeah.
It's just, if people don't like it, they're free to tune out. But
Yeah.
yeah, I can relate to that too. I live in a place where the percentage of Muslims is very low, but it's not uncommon that during certain times of the year I would go somewhere and there's a guy or a couple of guys wearing a shirt that says "Ask me about Islam" and handing out
Mm.
pamphlets and wanting to discuss it. And and a lot of Muslims wear it. They literally wear their religion, in the way that they dress, in the way that they have their beard, and in the way that women dress, obviously.
Yeah.
And they center their life around it, and they talk about it, and they invite you to it. But as you mentioned, if someone were to talk about it the other way around, it's seen as obsessive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. Can we talk about wearing your religion? Because that's a Mormon thing. So I don't know if you're familiar with garments. Have you heard of garments?
No, not in the Mormon
It's like
sense.
their technical word. You're like, yeah, it means clothes.
Right.
So, garments specifically are something that you get when you go through the temple. And I think we talked about this on my channel, but for those who aren't familiar, you have to get a temple recommend, which means you have to go to your bishop, someone who is over your presiding over your ward or congregation, and tell them your sins. And if he deems you worthy enough, he will give you this little card that you swipe at the temple. And if it beeps no, you can't go in. So the temple is the big, beautiful castle-looking things, not the church buildings you go to every Sunday. Just want to make sure that there's clarification there. So you go to the temple and you take out what are called endowments. You're sealed to your partner for time and all eternity, and hopefully your children. And then you continue to go back and you do that for dead people. So that's the point of the temple. Now, when you go to the temple and you do that, they give you what's called the garments, and it's a t-shirt and shorts basically. Or in my parents' day, I think they still make them. They had onesies, like long john style. So what happens is it forces you to be modest. I'm completely immodest. I'm such a heathen. They would be here, like, well, they've gotten lower over the years. But when I was a kid, my mom had ones that were like up to here, and the sleeve was about mid-arm here, and and it was a full t-shirt, and you had to wear your bra on top, which was really funny to see my mom walking around like that, but it had to be the closest thing to your body. And then the shorts went down to her knees, so it forces you to be modest. And there's a lot of spiritual significance with the garments. There's symbols that are sewn into them, and they're all borrowed from Freemasonry. All of the temple ceremonies are basically just a ripoff of Freemason ceremonies. And so they have all these symbols and spiritual significance. And so it's a really, really, really big deal when you leave Mormonism to take them off. I never had to wear them because I didn't get married in the temple. I left when I was 19, even though I wanted to get married at 19 because that's like typical Mormon style. So I didn't ever have to wear them, thank goodness. But a lot of people, when they leave, it's extremely hard to take them off because they tell you it's literal protection. They tell you stories of people who got in car accidents and didn't have a scratch on their body because they were wearing their garments. But it's completely untrue. It's like thin cotton. It's not going to help you, but it's a mental thing, and they scare you into wearing them. And back in my grandma's day, you couldn't even take them off to have sex, and you couldn't completely take them off to shower. You had to like have one arm in at all times so that you were protected. So that's wearing your religion in Mormonism.
Wow. I mean, I have so many thoughts. First of all, as some people have pointed out in the comments, what you're describing, as sad as this is going to sound, sounds like freedom to a lot of Muslim women. Just what you're describing as modesty to a lot of Muslim women is immodest. Just showing
Mhm.
that much skin, shoulders. Are you a harlot? Um, and and I know I've spoken to several who, even after leaving the religion, if they wore the hijab before and they, wore it for a long time, they feel almost naked without it. So even
Right.
showing hair, like feeling the breeze in your hair, you feel naked. It's equivalent to me feeling the breeze, somewhere under my pants that I'm not supposed to. That's
Mhm.
that's how they feel. It feels wrong, and that's unfortunate. And yeah, to realize that, for you guys, it's just a piece of cloth. I guess,
T-shirt and shorts.
yeah. It's funny how, I mean, and in Islam, obviously, there's the hijab for women. Some people think it's mandatory, some people think it's optional, but really highly encouraged, which is, social pressure, it's mandatory.
Mhm.
But aside from that, when doing pilgrimage, the men also have to dress in a specific way and the women have to dress in a specific way. And it's funny how a lot of cults and high control groups focus so much on making you conform and wear the same thing as everybody else.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah. They take
it,
away your identity.
yeah, and I think it's a form of control as well. Like, and you feel like because you're a part of something so big, you can't dare step out of line. That you've invested so much, you all look like you're dressed the same way. This must mean something. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So when we get further down into fundamentalism, the FLDS are known. People may have seen Keep Sweet Pray and Obey, the documentary on Netflix, which is about that sect of fundamentalist Mormons. But they wore prairie dresses, which is basically what they wore in Joseph Smith's time because they're fundamentalist. So they had to be completely covered. I don't think they could have anything shorter than the elbow or maybe higher up on the arm, but definitely dressed all the way down to the floor. Nothing else could show, and really high necklines as well. So there are versions of that, but still nowhere near as extreme as what you're describing.
Yeah. And unfortunately, some in the most extreme versions, they would cover up, even their face, and to the point that their hands, they have to wear gloves and they have to wear,
Wow.
socks or stockings or something so that even, that ankle or part of their foot doesn't show, just no skin
Hmm.
whatsoever. Even their voice can be considered immodest. I mean, a woman's voice is immodest. It's a miracle,
Wow.
honestly, that Muslim women have as much rights and freedom as they do, but some of them don't, unfortunately. If we were to basically idealize the ideal Muslim woman, should be quiet, covered up, and just hidden.
Wow. Disappeared.
Yeah,
Invisible.
yeah. I mean, okay, where do we go from here?
Well, we haven't really talked about the migration in depth, and I'm really curious about the pilgrimage because I think there's something similar in Mormonism. So can you explain what it is that you do at the pilgrimage?
It's been so long since I actually did it. So it's a bunch of rituals that are centered around mostly in Mecca. So that's the holy city in Islam, and it's in Saudi Arabia. And you're supposed to go. You do a bunch of laps around the Kaaba. You walk a bunch of laps back and forth to emulate the story of uh, Abraham's wife. But I can't remember if it's his servant who later became his wife or something, or the mother of his child running back and forth to find water. So you do a bunch of things like that. And every Muslim is supposed to do it at least once in their life if they can afford it. And what that essentially means is a lot of poor Muslims save up their entire life just to go on that one trip. And many people do it multiple times because they think, you get a lot of rewards, you wash away your sins, you're born anew almost. So yeah, there's a lot of importance put on those rituals in that place specifically.
Okay. So it doesn't have to do with the pilgrimage or the transition from Medina to Mecca in
I
Muhammad's
don't
time.
remember if it had to do with that.
Okay. I ask because there's something similar in Mormonism, which is called the trek, the pioneer trek, where us as kids would dress up like pioneers and pull hand carts over a whole weekend and a whole bunch of miles. And it was awful.
Mhm.
I mean, some of it was fun. We would do square dancing and cook meals or whatever. But yes, it was to emulate the migration of Mormons out to Utah and what the pioneers had to do to settle Utah to practice their religious freedom or to have religious freedom.
Okay, I see. And by the way, to correct part of what I said, so yeah, most of the Hajj is in Mecca, but for part of it, you would go to Medina and pray near the grave of the Prophet. So yeah, there's a
Okay.
component of that there as well. And what's funny is, I guess this is similar to the tablets that, had they existed, had we been able to see them, that might serve as some sort of evidence for the claims of Joseph Smith.
Hmm.
I'll do you one better. Muhammad being buried in Medina, allegedly, prophets do not decompose. So if we dug him up and found him just, as a human in that state, that would mean something. I don't know if that would prove the entire religion, but it would certainly mean something. But obviously, that's not something that Muslims are willing to do because it would be viewed as disrespectful.
Interesting. Oh, but you could check, but you can't because disrespectful.
Too bad.
Well, yeah, the funny thing about the plates is I remember the first time I had to explain this to somebody who wasn't Mormon, and I was like, "Yeah, it's another testament of Jesus." And they're like, "That's great." I'm like, "Yeah, it's these plates. He translated them. An angel told him where to find them. It was the whole thing." And it talks about the Israelites came to America, da, 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 da. And they're like, "Awesome, where are the plates now?" And I heard myself say, "They were taken back up to heaven." I was like, "Oh, that doesn't help me." And they're like, "Cool, bro." And that was the end of that.
So when did it click in your head that there's something wrong with that?
Well, when I said it, I was like, "Oh, this sounds crazy." Because I had never been asked questions as a Mormon growing up in Utah, but when I moved to Portland and I was the new kid and it was my senior year of high school, everyone was like, "You're Mormon, that's weird. Do you have horns?" and asked me all these weird questions. And so I had to actually start critically thinking about it. I still didn't really critically think about it though. I would just push it off. Like that example where I was like, that is kind of weird that we don't have them because that would prove everything if we could just have them and then retranslate them. You know what I mean? And then I was like, well, they're too sacred to be kept on the earth. So God had to take them to heaven. And you make all these excuses. I didn't really deconstruct until I moved to Vegas. And I was in such a low place that I was like, this is awful. I need to make sure that this is a true religion. Found out that it wasn't. And then I bounced. So,
Mm.
yeah, tangent.
And now you're here.
Now I'm here talking to you. But I think we were going to talk a little bit about the migration thing because there's other things that we need to touch on, which is, I think, well, I'll speak to Mormonism and then you could speak to Islam. So when they traveled to Utah, Brigham Young, who was the second prophet, because Joseph Smith was killed, we talked about that in the previous live stream. Joseph Smith was killed and martyred. And so Brigham Young took over. He was awful, horrible human being. The things that he did were just so bad. Honestly, the Brigham Young University should be renamed. So he gets to Utah. He claims he's king. He's like, I'm the king of this land. And the United States government was like, no, you're really not, though. This is the United States. So he tried to pull a bunch of stuff. Joseph Smith ran for president. Brigham Young tried to claim that he was king. So he's ruling this area and he's successful in building up Mormonism because polygamy is running rampant. He had like 60 wives, 80 wives. I don't know, something crazy, way more than Joseph Smith did. And he's actively making babies with all of them. So they're populating this area as fast as possible. And then anyone who came in, there's something called the Mountain Meadows Massacre, where they were just settlers. I think they were passing through trying to get to California or something. And Brigham Young was super paranoid and he thought that they were coming to kill him for some reason. Maybe the same people who killed Joseph Smith were out to get him. He sent people to go and slaughter, I think it was 140 something people. I could have that number wrong, but it was a lot of people that they slaughtered just because they wanted to keep their area so isolated, and they didn't want outside people coming in and messing up what they had going. So I think that's the only reason Mormonism survived, because it is super kooky when you look at the actual beliefs, and they were able to thrive through population growth and through keeping outsiders out. So was it similar with yours?
There's at least some similarities. So to the last thing that you said, um, there is some emphasis on basically have children and God will provide, or some Muslims view it as a good thing to increase the population of Muslims through having kids, or in general, just having kids, maybe not necessarily as the goal of having more Muslims, but has certainly worked that way. There was one instance where there's some gross details to the story, but basically the part that's relevant is the followers of the prophet asked him, when we're having intercourse, how do I say this? How do we end the session? Does it matter whether we end it, while
In or
still with
out?
the, yeah, inside or outside? And Muhammad said it doesn't matter because whatever God ordained, like whatever is meant to happen, will happen. So if you're meant to have kids, you're going to have kids. It doesn't matter. But obviously, biologically, it matters. It's not
It
a
matters.
perfect method of
Yeah.
contraception, but it makes a difference.
Uh-huh.
So anyway, yeah, there's and unfortunately today there are a lot of Muslim communities around the world in Muslim countries where, especially when there's poverty, people have even more kids. So a lot of the numbers that you hear about how many Muslims there are in the world, it's just because people are born into it and they continue
Mm,
to create more people that are in the religion, and there's no easy avenue to leave the religion. I mean,
mm,
I'm sitting right here paranoid about my safety, and this is just a common theme that dissent is not, it's not okay in the Muslim world. And even back in the days of the Prophet, people who would oppose him, sometimes he would forgive them, but sometimes he would, you know, kill them. And there's at least one story of a massacre where he killed around 400 people from one tribe. A silly detail or a gross detail is that that included young people, but he would check first if they had enough hair in that region to be considered an adult or not. If
mm.
not, then slave. If they are considered an adult, so we're talking like teens, kill them. So he's done brutal things like that. And a lot of his wealth at the time, there's contradicting stories about how he was so poor at some parts of his journey and such a humble man, and he didn't really care for money. But also, um, there's a verse about how you give a fifth. If I remember correctly, I don't remember the fraction exactly, but around a fifth of the proceeds of the war to God and His messenger. So at some point, he was in the war business, when he got big. So I guess, yeah, like you said, biggest militia, Joseph Smith, he had the biggest or strongest militia at the time. So there's a lot of similarities. I don't know if I missed anything in the
So,
comparison.
giving a fifth of your money, would that be considered a tithe? And is that something that's still practiced today?
No, no, it's not on a personal level.
Oh.
It's the spoils of war. A fifth of it
Oh.
goes to the prophet and God, basically, whatever that
Oh,
means.
interesting.
Yeah.
Because there is a tithing requirement for Mormons, which is 10% of your income before taxes. If you're super Mormon, you have to give to the church. And so they were kind of caught with their pants down not that long ago. I think it was in 2020. Someone leaked one of their bank statements that showed they had $100 billion in one bank account. And that he's a portfolio manager, senior portfolio manager for the Ensign, which is the church's holdings. He came out again just last year, a few months ago, and was like, yeah, I need to talk about how the church is managing their money because they're not following all the rules to be a tax exempt status religion because of how they're handling their finances. So it's estimated they have over $300 billion in assets and cash, and they still require a 10% tithe from all of their members. With anything you get, any check that you get, it needs to go to the church, and they even say tithe before you feed your family. And
Wow, that's
then
terrible.
yeah, and they go to poor countries and they're like, "Hey guys, the reason you're poor is because you're not tithing." It's really backwards. I will give them credit that they have what's called bishop storehouses where you can go and ask for food, not money, but you can be like, "Hey, our family needs food because we gave you our money for tithing." And they're supposed to help you out. But there's been so many stories of bishops where they're supposed to say, well, you need to ask your family first before you come to us. And once you've asked everyone in your life if they can help you and they still can't help you, then come back and we'll give you a can of beans or whatever it is. So it's still really hard
That's
and
the
really
worst food bank I've
shameful.
ever heard of. Like, yeah.
Yeah, it's not great. So that's tithing. We've been
So,
going already 48
yeah.
minutes. Look at us.
I think, I mean, I guess we should wrap up soon just because we did a, similar length live stream over there. To the
We could
last point
always
though,
do another one.
we should definitely do another one. We still have a lot to go through with the list.
Yeah.
And I think it would be interesting for you to sort of pitch Mormonism to me in a
Oh,
stream,
lordy.
because I am a curious person. I have a lot of questions. So, yeah, I don't know. That's another idea.
I
But I
can
just wanted
totally
to,
try. It would
yeah,
be interesting.
yeah. I wanted to say a couple of things. Well, first of all, to give credit to Islam, at least it doesn't have that problem. I mean, there's a the concept of zakah, which is every year you're supposed to give 2.5% of your stagnant savings or something to that effect. Basically, money that you haven't touched in a while. 2.5% to charity. It's not to a specific charity, but there are charities that are claim to be zakah approved because you
Mm.
have to give zakah to other Muslims. You can't give it to non-Muslims. You can give charity to
Oh,
non-Muslims, but it
interesting.
doesn't count as your 2.5%. But there is no accounting system. It's just between you and God. And
Okay.
it's not like in the same sort of central bank way that that you describe it to be. So I'll give credit to Islam in that department. And I just wanted to give a disclaimer to everyone. If you are joining any organization and they say, give me X% of your money every month or every year, or whatever it might be, that is a scam. Even if it has nothing to do with religion, even if it's like a sales
Yeah.
position or a business opportunity, and they say,
MLM.
yeah, exactly. Um, if anyone ever asks you for like a fixed amount of money every whatever period, that's a scam. Run away.
It's so funny you say that because you mentioned earlier in our stream or my stream that Mormonism is an MLM, and it 100% is. And that's why it's so easy for Mormons to fall into MLMs because it makes sense to them. It feels comfortable. Even if they don't recognize that it's the same structure as Mormonism, it 100% is. And yeah, they have so many ways to make money. I can't give them credit. So I'm going to do the opposite of what you just did. So you have to give your money to them. The garments that I mentioned, you have to buy from them that they manufacture. When you go to the temple, you have to pay to rent temple clothes. I didn't even get into what the temple clothes look like. That's funny. Sorry, that was disrespectful. That they are very interesting, the clothes that you have to wear in the temple. Um, you have to buy them from the church or you have to rent them every time you go. They don't just give them to you, and you can't be in there unless you're wearing them. The food in the temple you still have to pay for. What else? I mentioned in our live stream earlier that they use the members to do everything. It's all volunteer based. So they even have people landscaping the temple grounds, the members landscaping. They're like, what do I saw a post from someone. Mormon Stories is a great resource for anyone who's interested in more of this stuff. And Kara Burrell / Nuance Ho, she's also a great ex-Mormon channel. But there's a post by them showing they sent out this flyer saying, hey guys, we are looking for people to landscape the temple grounds. What an honor to spend your summer landscaping the temple grounds. So they're not even paying landscapers when they have all of this money. It's really frustrating. So that's my little rant about giving money to the church.
Well, to wrap up, I have to ask this very pressing question for both of
Uh-huh.
us. Is Patreon one of those scams? Is it an MLM by asking people to join your Patreon? Because it does
No.
fit the description. You know, it is a set amount of
Does
money
it
every month.
though? I see what you're saying. Well, no, that's it's a donation. They can
Hmm.
retract it at any time. They
Hmm.
can join again at any time, and they're actually getting something. Well, I guess if you're a patron on our channel, we don't do as many perks as we should, and I apologize for that. But you're supposed to be getting something for your money instead of just giving it away and getting imaginary blessings either in heaven or in this life. So,
Yeah.
I'm going to say no.
Yeah, it's not, but no pressure. But you know, only the best of
Would.
you give to Patreon. If you want to be a top
Only the
fan,
best
yeah,
followers.
yeah, but no pressure though. No
That's so funny.
um yeah, and on that note, by the way, I don't know about how it works on your channel, but I just want to remind people that if it wasn't for the patrons, especially the first ones and especially the ones that to this very day are supportive, I would not have been able to do this work. um
Aw.
YouTube is extremely difficult, especially on a smaller scale. So most of the money that I make from this channel is through patrons. So I'm really grateful because a lot of people feel like they can't help, especially coming from a Muslim background, where, as you can see, there's a lot of fear about personal safety, and they can't
Yeah.
even talk to people around them about this stuff. So what they can do is they can, you know, help someone who can talk about these things. So I want to tell them that you are helping. and I couldn't do this without you. So thank you, everyone.
Oh, that's so nice. Yeah, I always tell people that if you can't support on Patreon, just watching the videos, especially to the end, tells the algorithm that you like us and that other people should watch it too, and interacting with it in any way, even if it's an anonymous account that doesn't have your name on it or anything. If you can like the stream right now, if you can,
Mhm.
if you can like it, if you can comment after the fact, even if it's an emoji, just commenting and interacting shows that our content is valuable and worthy of being seen. And that helps tremendously in getting more people to come on and getting more exposure. So that's like my first thing is interact with our page. And then if you are able to support on Patreon, that's great too. Or merch. We have some funny t-shirts and stuff that people
Yeah.
can get. But yeah, it's great. Just being here, just being on the live. Thanks for watching, guys.
Yeah, and I was joking earlier, by the way, like there's absolutely no pressure,
I
um,
know.
and I don't even gatekeep any of my content to Patreon. Like I might have some like behind the scenes or rambling or whatever, but nothing that is actually integral to the message. So everything is here. And I also wanted to mention something. Yeah, and we do have a Discord server. We have a small community going for patrons and YouTube members. So that's another, side perk for people who
Nice.
choose to support. But to your point about leaving a comment, it's so valuable when I get to read, even if it's the same thing that a lot of people have said before, just knowing that that is one more of the viewers who thought this thing is valuable. And
Yeah.
especially when they put a timestamp, that's one of my favorite things. When they say this moment right here, that's what my comment is about, or this is what stood out to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so those are the best of you, to quote from scripture, I guess. Yeah,
Nice. Separating the wheat from the tares. That's a Mormon one.
there you go. Um, yeah, I'm
Cool.
wondering if there's anything else that you wanted to add or ask. We still have a long list, but time is
Oh my
limited. But
gosh, we do still have a long list. I would say, okay, my question for you is, do you think Joseph Smith just stole the ways of Muhammad? Especially according to that quote, which maybe you should read it on yours too, since we read it on
oh,
mine.
yeah, yeah, I forgot to mention it here. So this is a quote by Joseph Smith. "I shall be to this generation a new Muhammad." And he even adopted his fighting slogan as his fighting slogan, the words which he thought he had learned from Islam, either the Al-Quran or the sword, which is grammatically incorrect because Al-Quran is the Quran. So I don't know enough about Joseph to know if he actually, how much did he read about Muhammad? And, back then, how was it even, I didn't know there were translated copies. Like it wasn't like you could just Google it. So, props to him.
Right.
He did some research. Like go to your local library. That's where you find stuff. At
Yeah.
least that's where it used to be. So I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, in the same way that there's a lot of stuff in Islam that's from other religions that was in the region. Even though Joseph Smith was nowhere near the Middle East. He lived in an international, a globalized world at that point where there was trade, there were ships, and these stories made their way to him. So I would not be
Yeah.
surprised if he adopted some of Muhammad's ideas.
I think there are connections because the Book of Mormon is based on the claim that Israelites came over and settled the states, settled the Americas. So even then, like it doesn't make sense. And we get this is a whole tangent. I'm just quickly, there's something called a patriarchal blessing that you get when you're like 12 to 15 and you have to fast for a whole day and someone puts their hands on your head and apparently channels God. It's like being a medium, but they claim you should never go to mediums. It's anyway. So when you get your patriarchal blessing, they tell you which tribe you're from, like which Israelite tribe, which makes no sense to me because I'm like, well, wouldn't you just be from the one that your parents are from, technically? But they're different.
Oh, do they
So
ever get it wrong that way? Like you're not from the one that your
well,
parents
that's
are
the
from?
thing. They can be different, and no one goes, they said the wrong one. They just go, oh, that's the tribe I'm from, which makes no sense because they are different than your parents, and they're Israelite tribes. I don't know. I need to look more into it and talk to you about it because I feel like there's a lot more connections than maybe we realize between ours. I don't
Mhm.
know. It's
I
very
I was
interesting.
gonna say also that sounds like the Sorting Hat in Hogwarts.
So, oh my gosh. That's so funny. Yeah, that's kind of
But
the
we
same
can't say that
thing.
he plagiarized. Maybe the author of Harry Potter plagiarized that from him.
Yeah, maybe. That's so funny. Anyway, we definitely have to have another conversation because we didn't even get into the culture, the rules, the purity culture. There's so much we didn't talk about. So maybe we could just do this again. LDS sorting hat. Maybe we can do this again.
Of course, yeah, I'm happy to. Thank you again, by the way, for people who don't know, I published a video a couple months ago about my story with sex in Islam, and then I was invited by Shalice to go to her channel and talk about it. So we have a video that they just published a couple of days ago, and the beginning of this live stream is on her channel as well. So go check it out, go subscribe. And if you're new here, welcome. Sorry, I forgot to say that earlier. I forgot. Yeah, please subscribe. I don't often talk about Mormonism because I don't know much about Mormonism, but I'm interested now, especially knowing all the similarities, and I'm sure that we'll have a lot of collaborations in the future.
Yeah, I can be a resident ex-Mormon and I'll do my best.
Yeah. And yeah, thank you everyone for being here. And
Thanks for having me.
of course. And I want to thank our patrons and YouTube members for being part of the community and for supporting me. Well, I guess my face is behind the credits, but that's fine. Your names take precedent to my face. And as always, think critically and think for yourself.